The Odyssey drifted silently through the endless expanse of deep space, its hull a dull silver sheen against the black void. Commander Lila Karn sat in the captain's chair, staring at the swirling readings on the holographic display in front of her. The anomaly had appeared abruptly on their long-range scanners, a dark, formless region that seemed to defy standard classification. "It's not a black hole," said Dr. Elias Trent, his voice tinged with both curiosity and unease. "No gravitational pull, no radiation signatures, just void." Marissa Cho, the ship's engineer, leaned over the console, her brow furrowed. "It's reflecting almost no light. Whatever it is, it's big, hundreds of kilometers across." Karn tightened her grip on the armrests. After months of sterile mapping and cataloging mineral-rich asteroids, they finally had something extraordinary. "Take us in closer. Let's get a visual." The ship's engines hummed softly as they approached the anomaly. The crew gathered at the observation deck, staring out at the structure as it came into view. It was enormous, a shimmering translucent sphere hanging in the void like a dark cosmic pearl. Its surface seemed to ripple with faint, iridescent waves, almost as if alive. "Is it artificial?" asked Harrow, the pilot, breaking the silence. "Absolutely," replied Trent. "Nothing natural would have such symmetry, but this material, it's absorbing every scan we throw at it." Karn tapped her chin thoughtfully. "Any signs of activity?" Cho shook her head. "None. It's inert. Whatever this thing is, it's been sitting here for eons." The commander's curiosity burned. "Suit up. We're going to take a closer look." The crew prepared quickly, donning their sleek exploration suits and readying the shuttle for deployment. The small craft detached from the Odyssey and descended toward the sphere. As they approached, its sheer scale became overwhelming, miles upon miles of swirling obsidian-like material stretching in every direction. The shuttle touched down on the surface with a gentle thud. Outside, the airlock hissed open, and the crew stepped out onto the alien structure. The ground felt solid but unnaturally smooth, as though it had been polished by a colossal hand. The faint glow of alien glyphs stretched in long, looping patterns, their meanings indecipherable. "Look at this," Trent said, crouching near one of the glyphs. He waved a scanner over it, but the device sputtered and fizzled. "Nothing. It's like the symbols are rejecting any attempt to decode them." "What are they?" asked Karn. "Warnings? Instructions?" "Could be either. Could be both," Trent replied. A sudden vibration beneath their feet silenced the conversation. The crew instinctively stepped back, weapons at the ready, as the surface of the sphere began to shift. A section of the ground split apart with a deep, resonant groan, revealing a dark opening, a perfectly circular hatch leading into the structure's interior. "Is it inviting us in?" Harrow asked nervously. "Or luring us," Karn muttered. But curiosity outweighed her caution. She signaled for the team to proceed, and they descended into the darkness. The interior was vast and cathedral-like, with walls stretching high into the gloom. The same glowing glyphs lined the surfaces, casting eerie, shifting shadows. Strange, monolithic structures dotted the chamber, their forms asymmetrical yet oddly harmonious. A low hum filled the air, faint but omnipresent, like the pulse of a sleeping giant. Cho approached one of the monoliths, her hand grazing its smooth surface. "This feels alive," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "like it's watching us." "Don't touch anything," Karn ordered sharply. But her warning came too late. A sudden surge of energy shot through the monolith, and the glyphs blazed to life, their light bathing the chamber in a sickly, pulsating glow. The ground trembled beneath them, and the low hum grew louder, deeper, resonating in their chests. A noise, alien and guttural, echoed through the chamber, something massive stirring in the depths of the structure. "What the hell was that?" Harrow shouted, backing away from the monolith. "I don't know," Trent said, his voice shaking, "but I think we just woke it up." The light intensified and the glyphs began to shift and change, their patterns becoming chaotic, frantic. The air grew thick, heavy, as if the structure itself were alive and reacting to their presence. "We need to get out of here," Karn barked. "Now!" But as the crew turned to flee, the chamber began to change. Walls folded and twisted, reshaping themselves into a maze of corridors. The opening they had come through was gone, replaced by an unending expanse of alien architecture. And then, from somewhere deep within the structure, came the sound of something moving, slow, deliberate, and growing closer. The sound of movement echoed through the twisting corridors, a deep, wet slither that sent shivers down the crew's spines. Commander Lila Karn gestured for silence, her hand gripping the hilt of her plasma cutter. The alien glyphs pulsed erratically on the walls, casting warped shadows that seemed to shift and writhe with a life of their own. "Stay together," Karn whispered, her voice low but firm. She motioned for Doctor, Trent and Harrow to move ahead, while Marissa Cho brought up the rear. The engineer clutched her scanner, its display flickering in and out of function, useless against whatever force had come alive around them. The crew edged forward cautiously, the corridor narrowing until they reached another chamber. This one was larger, its ceiling disappearing into the darkness above. In the center stood a massive structure, a jagged, crystalline column encased in what looked like liquid obsidian. The substance moved and rippled within its containment, as if alive. Around the column, the glyphs were no longer static. They spun and swirled in maddening patterns, defying the laws of geometry. "What the hell is this?" Harrow muttered, his voice barely audible over the strange guttural hum that seemed to emanate from the column. Dr. Trent stepped closer, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. "It's organic," he said, running a gloved hand over the surface of the containment vessel. "This isn't just a prison, it's a preservation system, like stasis." "For what?" Karn asked, her voice tight. Before Trent could answer, the chamber shuddered violently. The crystalline column cracked, a thin fissure running its length. The liquid obsidian within began to spill out, pooling at the base before flowing unnaturally toward the walls, climbing them like sentient tendrils. The crew stumbled back as the black substance coalesced into a shape, a grotesque humanoid figure that rippled and shifted, its form never fully solid. Eyes, or what might have been eyes, opened on its surface, glowing a deep, malevolent red. The entity loomed before them, its presence heavy and oppressive. The air around it seemed to distort, bending light and sound. It made no sound of its own, but its very existence seemed to vibrate through the chamber, resonating deep in their bones. "Run!" Karn yelled, snapping the crew out of their stunned paralysis. They bolted, sprinting back toward the corridor they had come from, but the walls shifted again, sealing off their path. The entity moved with unnatural speed, its form flowing like liquid but striking with the force of steel. A tendril shot out, catching Harrow by the leg. He screamed as the black substance surged over his body, sinking into his flesh. "Help me!" he shrieked, his voice rising to a horrifying pitch. The crew turned in time to see his body begin to warp. His limbs elongated grotesquely, his torso splitting open as jagged crystalline growths erupted from within. His face twisted into a grimace of pure agony before collapsing inward, his entire form breaking apart into a mass of writhing organic shards that glowed faintly with the same red light as the creature's eyes. Karn pulled Trent and Cho down a side passage, her mind racing. The glyphs continued to pulse and shift on the walls, their patterns almost mocking in their chaotic rhythm. The corridors seemed alive, twisting and turning, herding them toward an unknown destination. "Marissa!" Karn barked. "Find us a way out!" Cho frantically scanned the walls, her scanner sparking and hissing under the strain of the alien interference. "Everything's changing too fast," she shouted. "I can't get a read on anything." The ground beneath them buckled, and they were thrown into another chamber, this one smaller and filled with the same alien monoliths they had seen earlier. The walls pulsed with the obsidian substance, and the entity's presence filled the room like a suffocating weight. Dr. Trent backed against a wall, his voice trembling. It's not just trying to kill us. It's consuming us, absorbing us into itself." Karn glared at him, her pulse racing. "We need to figure out how to stop it. These monoliths, do they control the prison?" Trent shook his head. "I don't know. I can't make sense of the symbols." The creature flowed into the room, its form towering over them. Tendrils shot out, slamming into the monoliths, which began to crack and crumble under the impact. The walls started to warp, the chamber collapsing inward. The creature didn't move like a predator. It moved like a force of nature, unstoppable and indiscriminate. Karn fired her plasma cutter, the beam striking the entity and cutting through one of its tendrils. The severed piece fell to the ground, but immediately began to writhe, growing into a smaller, equally menacing version of the original. "It can regenerate," Trent yelled, pulling Karn back as the smaller creature lunged at her. Karn gritted her teeth. "Then we don't fight it. We contain it." "How?" Cho asked, her voice cracking. The answer came from the walls themselves. The glyphs began to change again, their spinning patterns aligning into something coherent. For a brief moment, Karn saw an image, a map of the structure with a single glowing point at its core, the sealing mechanism. "That's our way out," she said, pointing. "We get to the core and activate the seals." Cho hesitated, glancing at the writhing creature. "And if we can't?" Karn didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was clear. If they failed, they wouldn't be leaving at all. The corridors twisted endlessly, reshaping themselves into a labyrinth that defied logic. Commander Lila Karn led the remaining crew, Their steps hurried and uneven as the constant hum of the structure vibrated through their bones. The alien glyphs on the walls had changed again, no longer warnings or maps, but a chaotic jumble that writhed like living veins, pulsing in sync with the oppressive presence of the creature hunting them. "We're rats in a maze," Marissa Cho muttered, her voice hollow. The engineer's face was pale, her hands trembling as she held her useless scanner. "It's playing with us." Dr. Elias Trent shook his head, beads of sweat rolling down his temples. "It's not playing. It's learning." His voice was a whisper tinged with dread. "Every time it kills, it gets stronger. It's adapting to us." The memory of Liam Harrow's horrific transformation was fresh in their minds. His screams still echoed in Karn's ears, but she forced herself to stay focused. She couldn't afford to dwell on the dead, not when the living needed her. "We're not giving it another chance," she said firmly, glancing back at Cho and Trent. "The core is our only option. If we can reach it, we can seal this thing back inside." "And if the glyphs don't work?" Cho asked, her voice tight. "They will," Karn replied, though she didn't believe her own words. She had no other answer to give. The air grew heavier as they pressed on, the temperature dropping until their breath fogged in front of them. The sound of movement echoed around them, wet, slithering noises that seemed to come from every direction. The creature wasn't far. Karn rounded a corner and stopped abruptly. The corridor ahead was littered with fragments of alien material, jagged shards embedded in the walls and floor like shrapnel. In the center of the debris stood what remained of Marissa's toolkit, the metal twisted and fused into unrecognizable shapes. Nearby lay something far worse, a lump of flesh, pulsating faintly, fused with the wall. It was humanoid, or it had been. Limbs jutted out at unnatural angles, the skin stretched taut and glistening with a black, tar-like substance. Cho gagged, doubling over, but Karn grabbed her arm and pulled her away. "Don't look at it," she said sharply, though her own stomach churned. "Keep moving." "It's leaving us reminders," Trent said, his voice trembling. "Or warnings." "It's not leaving anything," Karn snapped. "It's spreading." They hurried on, the walls narrowing until the corridor became a tight, claustrophobic tunnel. The glyphs glowed brighter here, their light casting distorted shadows that seemed to reach for the crew as they passed. The hum in the air grew louder, accompanied by faint whispers, impossible voices that clawed at the edges of their sanity. Karn shook her head, trying to block out the sound. She had no idea if it was the creature or the structure itself, but it didn't matter. The whispers weren't words, not really. They were fragments of thought, images, emotions, anger, hunger, despair. "Do you hear that?" Cho whispered, her voice quivering. "It's calling to us." Trent stopped, his hand pressing against the wall as if to steady himself. "It's not just calling. It's inside our heads. It's trying to break us down." Karn grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Stay with me, Trent. It wants us to lose focus. Don't give it what it wants." But the cracks were already forming. Trent's eyes darted around the tunnel, his breath coming in short gasps. "It's more than that. It's showing me things. Memories that aren't mine." Karn tightened her grip. "That's not real. Fight it." A sudden sound behind them, wet, Heavy footfalls sent a jolt of panic through the group. Karn spun around, her plasma cutter raised, but there was nothing there. Just the empty corridor, stretching endlessly into shadow. "It's close," she said through gritted teeth. "We need to keep moving." They emerged into another chamber, this one vast and circular, its walls lined with alien growths that pulsed faintly like organic machinery. In the center stood another monolith, taller and more elaborate than the ones they'd seen before. Strange branching tendrils extended from its base, connecting it to the walls and ceiling like veins feeding a grotesque heart. "We're running out of time," Trent said, staring at the monolith. "If it's assimilating the structure, it'll break free completely. And then it won't just be us," Karn said. "It'll be the whole galaxy." The sound of movement came again, closer this time. A shadow shifted in the far corner of the chamber, and the air grew thick with the creature's presence. Karn raised her plasma cutter, the beam cutting through the darkness, but it was useless. The creature flowed into view, its form rippling and shifting, impossible to pin down. Tendrils sprouted from its body, each one tipped with jagged crystalline barbs. Cho screamed as a tendril lashed out, catching her arm. The substance spread across her suit, eating through the material and seeping into her skin. She dropped to her knees, clutching at her arm as it began to twist and elongate, the bones snapping audibly. "Marissa!" Karn shouted, rushing to her side, but Cho pushed her away. "Go!" she gasped, her voice filled with agony. You can still stop it." The creature moved closer, its tendrils reaching for Karn and Trent. Karn grabbed Trent's arm and pulled him toward the far side of the chamber, where another corridor opened. Behind them, Cho's screams turned into a gurgling, inhuman sound as her body began to change, merging with the alien growths on the walls. Karn didn't look back. She couldn't. As they fled, the whispers in the air grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just voices anymore. They were images, memories, thoughts bleeding into Karn's mind. She saw flashes of the creature's history, its endless hunger, its purpose. It wasn't alive in the way they understood. It was a force, a fragment of something greater, designed to consume and evolve. "We're running out of time," Trent said again, his voice distant, almost resigned. Karn clenched her jaw. "Then we make it count. The core is close. We end this." The core chamber loomed before them, vast and alien, its walls alive with pulsating glyphs that twisted and flowed like veins carrying a dark lifeblood. The structure's energy was palpable now, humming in rhythmic waves that resonated deep within Commander Lila Karn's chest. The glyphs burned with an intensity that made it hard to look at them, their shapes defying logic, as if they existed in dimensions beyond human comprehension. Dr. Elias Trent stumbled behind her, his breathing ragged, his face pale. They were the last two survivors, their steps faltering as exhaustion and fear clawed at them. The whispers had grown deafening, their presence now a cacophony of alien thoughts pressing into their minds. Karn felt her grip on reality slipping, but she refused to give in. She couldn't, not when they were so close. The core chamber stretched upward into darkness, its center dominated by a towering structure unlike anything they'd encountered before. It was a massive obelisk, its surface a blend of organic and mechanical, pulsating with the same black tar-like substance that had consumed their crew. Tendrils of energy spiraled upward from its base, connecting it to the walls and ceiling like roots of some ancient, malevolent tree. "This is it," Trent whispered, his voice trembling. "The sealing mechanism." Karn nodded, forcing herself to focus. "What do we need to do?" Trent approached the obelisk, his eyes scanning the glyphs that writhed across its surface. "The log said it requires a living presence to activate, a sacrifice." He hesitated, his voice faltering. "It's the only way." Karn's stomach churned, but she had known this moment would come. The alien builders hadn't just created the prison, they had poured their lives into it, using their own essence to keep the creature contained. The same would be required now. Her eyes flicked to Trent, his hands shaking as he reached for the obelisk. "Wait," she said, grabbing his arm. "It doesn't have to be you." He turned to her, his face etched with exhaustion and despair. "We don't have a choice. You need to get out of here, Karn. You're the only one left who can—" A deep, guttural sound echoed through the chamber, cutting him off. The air grew heavy, suffused with the creature's presence. It was here. The walls twisted and warped as the entity emerged, its form larger now, more monstrous. Tendrils sprouted in every direction, their tips dripping with obsidian fluid that hissed and bubbled where it touched the ground. Eyes, dozens of them, opened across its surface, glowing with an otherworldly red light that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. The creature didn't move like a predator. It moved like inevitability, a force of nature, its very presence warping the space around it. Karn raised her plasma cutter, her hands steady despite the terror coursing through her. "Go, Trent," she shouted. "Activate the seals." Trent hesitated for only a moment before sprinting toward the obelisk, his fingers fumbling over the glyphs. The creature roared, a sound that was more than noise. It was a physical force, shaking the chamber and driving spikes of pain into their skulls. Karn stood her ground, firing her cutter at the entity. The beam sliced through one of its tendrils, but the severed piece immediately began to regenerate, sprouting new appendages that lashed out toward her. She dodged, rolling across the floor as the creature's tendrils slammed into the ground, leaving deep cracks in the alien material. "Hurry up, Trent," she yelled, her voice hoarse. "I'm trying," he shouted back, his hands glowing faintly as the obelisk began to react to his touch. The glyphs on its surface pulsed brighter, their patterns aligning into a coherent sequence. The hum in the air grew louder, a rising crescendo that seemed to synchronize with the entity's movements. The creature turned its full attention to Trent, its massive form surging forward. Karn saw the tendrils lashing out, and without thinking, she threw herself between them and Trent. The impact was brutal, sending her sprawling across the floor, her suit tearing as the black substance burned through it. Pain seared through her side, but she pushed herself up, refusing to let the creature reach him. "Karn, stop!" Trent shouted. "You can't—" But she ignored him, grabbing a shard of alien material from the ground and driving it into one of the creature's tendrils. It recoiled, the movement buying Trent precious seconds. The obelisk began to glow, its energy spiraling upward in brilliant arcs of light. The glyphs on the walls responded, their chaotic patterns aligning into a singular, blinding symbol. The creature let out a roar, its tendrils thrashing wildly as it sensed the prison reactivating. Karn stumbled back, her vision blurring, her strength fading. She knew what she had to do. "Trent," she said, her voice steady despite the pain, "get to the escape pod." He froze, his eyes wide with understanding. "Number Karn, don't—" "I'm not leaving," she said, cutting him off. "You have to finish this." Before he could argue, she lunged toward the obelisk, placing her hands on its surface. The glyphs flared to life, their light surging into her body, filling her with a burning, alien energy. She screamed, her voice mixing with the creature's roar as the obelisk began to draw them both in. The chamber shook violently, the walls collapsing inward as the sealing mechanism activated. The creature lashed out, its tendrils reaching for her, but it was too late. The obelisk's energy enveloped them both, pulling them into the core. The last thing Karn saw was Trent's face, his expression a mixture of horror and grief, before the light consumed her. The Odyssey's escape pod drifted silently away from the imploding structure, its lone occupant staring out at the void. Trent watched as the sphere collapsed inward, folding in on itself until it disappeared, leaving only a faint, rhythmic pulse in the darkness, a reminder of what had been sealed away. He sat in silence, his heart heavy, the whispers still echoing faintly in his mind. Karn had saved them, saved everyone, but the cost would haunt him forever. As the escape pod's navigation system charted a course back to the nearest colony, Trent closed his eyes. The image of her sacrifice burned into his memory. Out in the void, the faint pulse continued, a warning to those who might come too close. Some things should never be found.